I found out my brother was selling my grandmother's house on a Tuesday morning while I was standing in a bridal shop with pins in my dress and a woman kneeling at my feet adjusting my hem. My phone buzzed on the little velvet chair beside me. It was a text from my cousin Tanya that said, "Did you know Derek listed Grandma Vivian's house with a realtor? Someone just told me they saw the sign go up this morning." I read it twice. Then I read it a third time because my brain refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. I asked Tanya to send me a photo. She did. There it was, a bright red and white for sale sign planted right in front of the house I had been renovating with my own hands and my own money for 6 straight years. The house where I learned to bake. The house where Grandma Vivian held my face in both of her hands and told me I was the one who understood her. The house she always said was mine. My seamstress looked up and asked if I was all right. I told her I was fine. I was not fine. My wedding was 12 days away. And my older brother Derek had just decided to sell the floor out from under me without saying a single word. Let me tell you who Derek Calloway is, because you need to understand the full picture before any of this makes sense. Derek is 41 years old. He is the firstborn, the favorite son, and the person my mother Diane has spent her entire adult life making excuses for. When Derek dropped out of his MBA program, my mother called it a brave pivot. When Derek borrowed money from Grandma Vivian in 2019 and never paid it back, my mother said Grandma did not mind because she loved him. When Derek missed Grandma Vivian's final months because he was in Phoenix with a new girlfriend, my mother told everyone he had a very demanding schedule. I was the one who drove to that house every Saturday. I was the one who replaced the water heater in January when the pipes groaned like something alive. I was the one who sat beside Grandma Vivian on the back porch every Sunday, drinking her sweet tea and listening to her talk about her garden. Derek had not stepped inside that house in 2 years before she passed. But the moment she was gone, he remembered exactly where it was. That is the kind of man my brother is. And that is the kind of family I was born into. I had spent 34 years learning how to exist inside that imbalance without letting it swallow me. Now it had followed me all the way to my wedding. Marcus found me sitting on the kitchen floor when he got home that evening. Not crying. Just sitting with my back against the cabinet and my phone face down in my lap. He crouched beside me without a word, waited, and then I showed him Tanya's photo. He looked at it for a long time. Marcus is a careful man. He spent 4 years as a contracts paralegal before moving into project management, and the thing about careful men is that they do not panic. They calculate. He set the phone down between us and said, "Tell me everything you know about how Vivian handled the property." I told him all of it. I told him about the conversations over sweet tea. I told him about the afternoon 3 years before Grandma Vivian passed when she sat me down and told me she had been to see her estate attorney because she wanted things done properly. She had smiled at me and said, "I don't want any confusion, baby. This house is yours." I had cried that day. I remembered it perfectly. Marcus was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then he said, "Do you remember the name of the attorney?" I thought hard. And slowly, like a light coming on in a dark room, the name came to me. Patricia Holt. I did not call Derek that night. I wanted to. There was a version of me that wanted to pick up the phone and say every true thing I had ever swallowed in the name of keeping peace. But Marcus put his hand over mine when I reached for my phone and said, "Not yet." He was right. I had learned long ago that confronting Derek too early only gave him time to build a story. He was good at stories. He was good at turning facts into feelings and feelings into my problem. So instead of calling him, I called Patricia Holt's office first thing Wednesday morning. The receptionist told me Miss Holt was with a client, but would return my call before noon. I sat at my desk and did not hear a single word anyone said to me all morning. My colleague Faye asked twice if I wanted coffee. I said yes both times and never picked up either cup. When my phone finally rang at 11:47, I stepped into the stairwell and answered before the second ring. Patricia Holt had a calm, precise voice. I told her who I was. I told her I was Vivian Calloway's granddaughter. There was a short pause. Then she said, "Brooke." Yes. I was expecting someone from the family might call eventually. There are some things you need to know. What Patricia Holt told me in that stairwell changed everything. 3 years before Grandma Vivian passed, she had gone to Patricia's office and signed a transfer on death deed. Patricia explained it to me plainly. A transfer on death deed names a specific person to receive a piece of real estate the moment the owner dies. It does not go through probate. It does not get divided by a will. It does not require anyone else's signature or agreement. The property transfers automatically and completely upon death, as long as the deed was properly recorded with the county, which it was. Grandma Vivian had signed it, had it notarized, and filed it with the county recorder's office in the spring of that same year. The named beneficiary on that deed was me, Brooke Calloway. Not the estate. Not Derek. Me. Patricia said she had assumed someone in the family had discovered this by now, because the deed was part of the public record. Anyone could look it up. Derek had either looked it up and was hoping I had not, or he had never bothered and was acting on ignorance he mistook for power. Either way, the house was legally mine. It had been mine since the day Grandma Vivian took her last breath. Derek had signed a letter of intent to sell a house he had absolutely no right to touch. I walked back into the office that afternoon like I was carrying something fragile. Faye looked at me and said I seemed different from the morning. I told her I was just tired. That was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that something inside me had shifted. Before that phone call, I had been operating from fear, the old familiar feeling of being the one who stands to lose, the one who has to fight for what should have already been hers. After that phone call, I was operating from something else entirely. It was not anger. It was closer to clarity. Marcus and I talked for 3 hours that night. We spread everything across the kitchen table, the records Patricia offered to send, the county recorder's database we pulled up on my laptop, 6 years of receipts from every repair I had done on the house. The water heater. The new roof section over the back porch. The kitchen cabinets I stripped and repainted over 2 summer weekends. The electrical panel I paid a licensed contractor to replace because the old one was a fire risk. Every receipt had my name on it. Every payment had come from my account. Marcus looked at that pile of paper and said quietly, "He has no idea what he walked into." I nodded. And for the first time in days, I slept through the night. The family dinner happened on Thursday. My mother had called it without revealing the true purpose, which was something she had always done when she needed an audience to soften a blow. I knew what it was the moment I walked in and saw Derek sitting at the head of the table with his shoulders back and his chin lifted in that way he had when he believed he had already won something. My mother had made pot roast. There were candles. Tanya was there, which surprised me, and so was Uncle Rob, who had flown in from Atlanta and looked uncomfortable from the moment I arrived. Derek waited until my mother finished passing the rolls before he cleared his throat and said he had some news about the family estate. He used the word estate as if he were a man of great affairs. He said that given the unclear nature of Grandma Vivian's final arrangements, he had taken it upon himself as the eldest to list the property and had already received a strong offer. He said the proceeds would be split between himself and me after fees, framing it as generosity. My mother said Derek had been so thoughtful. I looked at my pot roast. I did not say a word. I let him finish. I let her smile. And underneath the table, I pressed my foot against Marcus's and held it there, steady and still. Derek noticed I had not reacted the way he expected. I could see it, a small flicker of uncertainty he covered with more talking. He said the realtor believed the property could close in 30 days. He said the market was strong. He said Grandma Vivian would have wanted the family to benefit. That last part almost broke me. Grandma Vivian had looked me in the eye and told me exactly what she wanted. She had gone to an attorney and made it legal. She had done everything right. And here was her eldest grandson invoking her name to justify stealing from her. Uncle Rob cleared his throat and asked Derek whether he had looked into the legal situation around the property. Derek said he had spoken to a real estate agent who confirmed there was no issue. A real estate agent. Not an attorney. Not the county recorder. A real estate agent. Marcus reached for his water glass and took a slow sip. Tanya looked at me carefully. I held my face very still and asked Derek, in the most neutral voice I could manage, whether he had received documentation from an estate attorney about the property's status. Derek said he did not know Grandma Vivian had used an attorney for property matters. And there it was. He had no idea. He had planted that sign in the yard and signed that letter without knowing a single relevant legal fact. The next morning, Marcus called Patricia Holt's office and arranged for her to send certified copies of the transfer on death deed and the county recording confirmation. Patricia also told us something that made Marcus go very quiet on his end of the call. The letter of intent Derek had signed with the buyer's agent created potential legal exposure for Derek personally, because he had represented himself as having authority to sell a property that was never in the estate at all. Patricia said if Derek moved forward in any way, we would need to act formally and quickly. Marcus thanked her, ended the call, and looked at me across the kitchen table. He said he signed that letter claiming authority he does not have over a property that was never his to sell. That is a serious problem for him. I asked what we should do. He said we were going to do exactly nothing until the wedding. We were going to let Derek believe everything was proceeding normally. We were going to let him feel comfortable and confident. And then, when the moment was right, we were going to show him what truly prepared looked like. I asked if he was sure about the timing. He said, "Brooke, let him celebrate. The further he goes, the harder the fall." I looked at my husband-to-be across that table, and I believed him completely. The week before the wedding was supposed to be the most joyful of my life. Instead, it split in two. On the surface, there were flowers to confirm and seating charts to finalize, and my best friend Camille flying in from Denver with a carry-on full of sentimental things she had packed for the morning of. Underneath that surface, there was a quiet war being organized from my kitchen table every night after dinner. Marcus had contacted a real estate attorney named Howard Webb, who specialized in property disputes. Howard reviewed the deed, the recording confirmation, and a copy of the letter of intent that Tanya had photographed from Derek's printer tray during a visit to my mother's house. Howard said the situation was unambiguous. The transfer on death deed was ironclad. Derek had no legal standing whatsoever. Howard drafted a formal notice that could be delivered to the buyer's agent and to Derek the moment we chose. Marcus told Howard to hold it. Not yet. I called Patricia Holt and asked if she would be willing to appear in person at a time and place we would confirm later that week. There was a pause. Then Patricia said, I have never once enjoyed watching a family destroy itself. But I do believe in the truth being told clearly. I will be there. Derek called me on Wednesday. I answered on the third ring, which I had practiced. He was warm in that performative way he got when he wanted something, calling me sis twice in the first 30 seconds, asking how the wedding prep was going. I told him it was wonderful. He laughed and said he was really looking forward to the reception. Then, as if it were an afterthought, he said the buyer's agent had been asking about next steps and wanted to know if I would be signing off on the sale paperwork after the honeymoon. I told him I would need to look at my calendar. He said that was completely understandable. He had no idea. I hung up and stood in my bathroom looking at myself in the mirror for a long time. I did not recognize the version of myself that had just managed that conversation. The Brooke I had been for most of my adult life would have exploded or cried. This Brooke just looked back at herself, calm and certain. Camille arrived Thursday evening with her carry-on and a bottle of good wine. She sat on my couch, and I told her everything from the beginning. She listened without interrupting once, which is one of the reasons she has been my best friend since the 9th grade. When I finished, she looked at me and said, "Oh, he has absolutely no idea what is coming." I poured the wine, and for the first time in 10 days, I laughed. The rehearsal dinner was held at a small Italian restaurant 2 blocks from the venue. My mother wore a cream blouse and spent most of the evening telling people how much she had contributed to the wedding planning, which was creative of her considering her actual contribution had been a single phone call. Derek gave a toast. He stood up with his glass and talked about family and roots and how proud he was to see his little sister building a life. He talked about Grandma Vivian. He said she was smiling down on us. He said some people are just meant to carry the family name forward with pride. I watched his face as he performed grief he had not earned and pride he had not built. Marcus's hand found mine under the table and held it. Camille caught my eye from across the table and made the smallest, most controlled expression of disbelief I had ever seen on a human face. Uncle Rob stared at his wine. Even my mother, who almost never noticed anything contradicting her preferred version of events, went briefly quiet after Derek finished. After dinner, when people were finding their coats, Derek put his arm around me and said, "Big day tomorrow, sis. You ready?" I smiled at him. I said, I have never been more ready for anything in my entire life. Every single word of that was completely true. The morning of the wedding arrived with the kind of stillness that feels deliberate. I woke before my alarm. The light through the curtains was soft and gold. Camille was already awake beside me, staring at the ceiling, and she asked how I felt. I told her I felt like myself for the first time in years. We got dressed slowly, the way you do on mornings that deserve to be remembered. The makeup artist arrived at 8. My dress had been pressed and hung on the back of the closet door since the night before. While she worked, I checked my phone once. There was a text from Marcus that said only Patricia confirmed. Howard confirmed. Today is ours. I put my phone away and did not pick it up again until the ceremony was over. The wedding itself was everything I had imagined and some things I had not thought to imagine. 47 people seated in a small courtyard with twinkle lights between old oak trees. Marcus waiting at the end of the aisle looking like a man who had been certain about something for a very long time. I walked toward him, and the world went quiet in the way it only does when you are exactly where you are supposed to be. When the officiant spoke and Marcus said yes before he was even supposed to, and the whole courtyard laughed, in that moment, every hard thing I had survived to get there felt like it had been worth exactly what it cost. The reception moved to the main hall after the ceremony. There were round tables with pale linen and small votives, and someone had arranged the floral centerpieces exactly as I had sketched them in a notebook 6 months earlier. The band played something slow while guests found their seats. Marcus and I moved through the room greeting people, and I felt the whole evening in my chest like something warm and full. Derek was at table 4 with my mother, Uncle Rob, and several cousins. He was in good spirits, laughing, his jacket buttoned, his glass raised. He did not know that Patricia Holt was already in the building. She had arrived 20 minutes earlier and was seated near the back with Howard Webb at a small side table the venue coordinator had quietly arranged. Camille had escorted them in personally through the side entrance, because Camille is the kind of best friend who understands that some tasks are sacred. The band shifted to an upbeat song. People moved toward the dance floor. And Marcus appeared at my shoulder and said, very quietly, Derek just asked the MC if he could say a few words before the formal toasts begin. I had not expected Derek to move first. I should have. He had always been the kind of person who needed to control the microphone. I watched him approach the MC near the small stage, watched the brief conversation, watched the MC nod and hand over the microphone with easy compliance. Marcus looked at me. I looked at Marcus. He said, "Do we move now or let him go?" I thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. I thought about 6 years of Saturdays at that house. I thought about the water heater and the roof and the cabinet paint on my hands. I thought about Grandma Vivian holding my face and telling me the house was mine. I thought about Derek's name on a letter of intent for a property that had never, not for a single moment since Vivian's last breath, belonged to him. I looked at Marcus and said, "Let him go." The lights shifted slightly as Derek walked to the front of the room, already smiling. He tapped the microphone. The room settled. He looked out at my wedding guests, my people, my day, and said he just wanted to share some exciting Calloway family news. He said the family home was going to have a wonderful new chapter. And then I nodded at Camille across the room. Camille crossed the room in 12 steps. I counted. She moved along the side wall without drawing attention, reached the back table where Patricia and Howard were seated, and leaned down to speak to them. Derek was still talking. He was saying the property had received a strong offer, and the family was excited about the future. He said Grandma Vivian had always believed in making smart decisions. He said it was a proud moment for the Calloway name. My mother nodded at table 4. A few guests looked politely interested. Derek paused for effect and said he was grateful to be handling things on behalf of the family. He looked at me across the room as he said that. I held his gaze. I did not smile. Something in my stillness must have registered because his expression flickered, just a fraction, just for a half second, before he recovered. And in that half second, Patricia Holt stood up from her table near the back. She was a small woman in a dark blazer, moving with the unhurried authority of someone who had spent 2 decades in rooms where truth needed to be spoken precisely. She did not rush. She simply walked forward. Howard Webb rose and followed. And the room began to notice them the way rooms notice when something important is about to change everything. Derek saw Patricia before she reached the front, and something happened to his face that I had never seen happen to it before. The confidence did not drain all at once. It left in stages, like water finding the edges of a cracked container. His smile stayed slightly too long, the way a smile does when the brain has stopped meaning it, but the face has not received the message. He lowered the microphone a few inches. Patricia stopped about 10 feet from him. She did not take the microphone. She did not perform. She introduced herself to the room in a clear, carrying voice, and said she was the estate attorney who had represented Vivian Calloway in the final years of her life. She said she was present because there had been some confusion about the property's status, and she believed it was important for the record to be accurate given the representations just made. Derek said, with the ghost of his former confidence, that he wasn't sure what she was referring to. Patricia opened the leather folder she carried. She removed a document and held it up. She said that 3 years before Vivian Calloway's passing, Vivian had executed a transfer on death deed, properly notarized and recorded with the county recorder's office. The sole named beneficiary was Brooke Calloway. The property had transferred automatically upon Vivian's death. Then Patricia said the words I had heard in my mind every night for 10 days. The house was never part of the shared estate. It was never available to be sold. And the authority to sell it was never yours to claim. The room went absolutely silent. Not the polite silence of people being patient. The deep silence of people who have understood that they just witnessed something real. Derek stood at the front of my wedding reception, holding a microphone in a room full of people, and he had nothing. I watched him try to find words. His mouth opened once and closed. Then he said Patricia must be mistaken, that he had done his research. Patricia said she had the counter-recorded deed in her hand and would be happy for anyone present to examine it. Howard stepped forward and confirmed he had reviewed all documentation and that the situation was unambiguous from a legal standpoint. Derek looked at my mother. My mother looked at Derek. And in that look between them I saw something I had been waiting my entire life to witness. The moment the story they had always told themselves ran out of road entirely. Derek's voice came out thinner than usual when he spoke again. He said there must have been a miscommunication. Patricia said there was none. The deed was clear. The recording was public record. Howard quietly handed Derek a single page, the formal notice he had prepared, and said it outlined the legal position in full and recommended Derek contact his own counsel regarding the letter of intent he had signed with the buyer's agent immediately. My mother stood up from table 4. I had expected this. Diane Calloway did not sit still when her version of events was being publicly dismantled. She crossed the room toward Patricia with her shoulders back, arranged in the way she always arranged herself when she believed volume and certainty could substitute for facts. She said Patricia needed to understand this was a family matter and there was no need for legal interference in what was simply a misunderstanding. Patricia looked at her with great patience and said she understood this felt like a family matter, but that a transfer on death deed was a legal instrument, not a family discussion, and the rights it established existed independent of anyone's feelings about them. My mother said Derek was the eldest and had been acting in the family's best interest. Patricia said, gently but without flinching, that acting in the family's best interest and having the legal authority to do so were two entirely different things, and that Derek had possessed neither. My mother turned to me. The hardness in her expression dropped into something older and more familiar. She said quietly, "Brooke, you don't have to do this here." I had waited for that line. I had played it in my head for 10 days and decided exactly what I would say. I stood up in my wedding dress, looked at my mother, and said clearly, "I didn't start this here." He did. The room exhaled. That is the only word for what happened. 47 people let out a collective breath that had been held for 8 minutes, and then the quiet broke into the low murmur of people who had witnessed something and needed to turn to the person beside them to confirm it was real. Uncle Rob sat at table 4 with his hands flat on the linen and an expression that was equal parts sorrow and relief. Tanya, who had sent me that first text from the bridal shop, had tears running silently down her face that she was not bothering to wipe. Camille stood against the wall near the back with her arms folded and her chin raised in the way she stood when she was proud of something and refusing to show it too openly. Derek had not moved from the front of the room. He was still holding the microphone at his side, pointed at the floor. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him look. Not because I had done anything cruel. Because the truth, stated clearly in a room full of witnesses, has a way of showing people exactly the size they actually are. Marcus was beside me now, his hand at the small of my back, steady as he had been through every night at the kitchen table. Howard gently retrieved the microphone from Derek's hand. The MC stepped forward and, with tremendous professionalism, asked if anyone else would like to share a wedding toast. What I had not anticipated was the buyer. The couple who had been told by their agent that the property deal was straightforward and under active negotiation, a family named the Morenos relocating from out of state, learned for the first time when Howard's formal notice reached their agent that the seller had misrepresented his authority over the property entirely. Their agent called Howard immediately and then called Derek. I found out about this 2 days into our honeymoon when Howard sent a brief email update. The Morenos had formally withdrawn from the agreement. Their agent was furious and had flagged Derek's conduct for misrepresentation in the transaction records, opening the possibility of a complaint to the state licensing board. Derek was now facing potential civil exposure from the buyer's side in addition to everything else. Howard recommended we wait and observe how it developed, since the transfer on death deed protected my ownership completely regardless. Marcus read the email over my shoulder on the balcony of our hotel room in Vermont, mountains pale blue in the distance. He set the phone down on the small table and picked up his coffee. I looked at the mountains and thought about Grandma Vivian telling me certain things complete themselves if you give them enough time. Derek had tried to light a fire under a house that was already legally mine, and the smoke had found him from every direction at once. There was one more thing I had not seen coming. 3 days after we returned, my mother called. Not to argue or defend Derek. She called in the quiet, flattened voice she used when something had cost her enough that performance was no longer available. She asked if she could come over. I said yes. She sat at my kitchen table and did not speak for almost a full minute, which was longer than my mother had ever voluntarily gone without speaking in my presence. Then she said she had gone back through Grandma Vivian's things documents she had never fully sorted after the funeral, and found a letter. Vivian had written it in the last months of her life, addressed to my mother, asking her to make sure Brooke was protected where the house was concerned. She had written that she trusted the legal work was done but wanted Diane to know her intentions clearly in case Derek made things complicated. My mother slid the letter across the table. It was 2 pages in Grandma Vivian's careful cursive. I read every word. By the time I reached the end, my throat was tight in a way I had not expected. My mother said very quietly she knew he might do this. I looked up. My mother's eyes were wet. She did not look like the woman who had nodded along at the dinner table. She looked like a woman who had finally run out of room to look away from what her choices had cost. Derek called me 6 weeks after the wedding. Not because he had changed or felt genuine remorse. He called because his real estate agent had officially reported the misrepresentation incident to the state licensing board, and he wanted to know if I would write something saying there had been a misunderstanding. I let him finish. He was using the careful, reasonable voice, the one he deployed when he needed a favor and had decided humility was the most efficient route. When he finished, I told him I would not be writing anything on his behalf. He said he was family. I said family was exactly why I had stayed quiet for 6 years while I paid to maintain a house he never once set foot in to help with. He said he had not known about the deed. I said the deed was public record, and he had represented himself as having authority to sell the property without conducting the most basic legal due diligence. There was a long silence. He asked what I planned to do about the house. I told him I planned to live in it. He asked if I was seriously going to move into that old place. I said yes. I said I had already replaced the water heater and the roof and the electrical panel and the kitchen cabinets, and I figured it was about time someone who actually loved it got to sleep there. He did not respond to that. I heard him breathing. Then he said, "So that's it." I said, "That's it, Derek." And I ended the call. Marcus and I moved into Grandma Vivian's house on a Saturday in October, exactly 8 weeks after the wedding. We rented a small truck, and Camille and Uncle Rob both came to help carry boxes, which meant it took twice as long and 3 times as much laughter as it would have with a professional crew. Uncle Rob carried Grandma Vivian's old rocking chair from the truck to the back porch himself, refusing all help, and set it in exactly the spot where it had always sat. He stood back, looked at it, and said, "Good. It belongs here." I walked through every room that afternoon while Marcus and Camille debated where the bookshelves should go. I stood in the kitchen where I had learned to make biscuits from scratch. I stood in the hallway where Grandma Vivian's photographs still hung in the same frames. I stood on the back porch in the October sun and looked at the garden she had kept and thought about all the Saturdays I had driven here without knowing I was also protecting something. I had just been coming because I loved her. That was what Derek had never understood and could never have understood, because the only thing he had ever looked at in this house was its market value. I sat in the rocking chair until the sun moved behind the trees and the air went cool and quiet. Then I went inside to help arrange the bookshelves and begin the life that had always been waiting here for me. People have asked me since then what the moment felt like, the moment in the reception hall when Patricia Holt held up that deed and the room went silent. They expect me to say triumphant. But what I actually felt was simpler than that. I felt accurate. Like something that had been slightly wrong for a long time had been set back into its correct position. Grandma Vivian had done everything right. She had gone to an attorney. She had signed the papers. She had made her wishes legal and recorded and permanent. The only thing left was for the truth to find its moment. Derek is not part of my daily life now, and I have made peace with that. My mother is trying in her particular limited way, and I am leaving a door open on my side for whatever that can eventually become. What I know is this: I spent 6 years giving to a house because I loved the woman who lived in it, and I loved what she had built. I spent 12 days staying calm while my brother tried to take it away. And then I stood in my wedding dress and let the truth do what truth does when you have taken the time to document it properly. I wake up every morning now in the house Grandma Vivian left me, with the man I married sleeping beside me and the old rocking chair on the back porch waiting, and the world finally feels like it weighs the right amount. So let me ask you this: if someone tried to take what was legally and rightfully yours, and you had one moment to set the record straight in front of every single person who mattered, what would you have done?